Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Try This First. This is the video series where I talk to nonprofit experts who just happen to be my friends, and we talk about different aspects of nonprofit leadership, nonprofit management, fundraising, and the idea is, of course, we don't want to wait to try something. We don't want to wait to do something until things are perfect. We don't want to wait until we've got $1 million budget and a 20-person staff and all the work is ready for us. We want to get started now because the missions we support need our help now. So we want to figure out what to try first. And today I'm super excited to have my colleague and friend, Mindy Friedman, here with us. Mindy is with Fireside Consulting, and Mindy is an expert in program evaluation. And that's a big topic. It's probably more than 30 minutes can handle, but I think we can do it. And it's also a topic that a lot of nonprofits struggle with. And I think it's really important for us to understand just how to get started with evaluation. So, Mindy, the question to you is, of course, if someone is really ready and interested in starting to do evaluate their programs, what should they try first?
Okay, I want to start by thanking you for this opportunity. This is super fun, and I'm very, very excited to be a part of it. Uh, so, in terms of program evaluation, I think it's one of those things that's worth defining first. That won't surprise you, as we often are very detail-oriented folks that are
Yes.
in the data strategy and program evaluation field. So let's just make sure we're all on the same page first. What is program evaluation and how can it help your organization? So every nonprofit leader, they have a mission, they have goals that they're trying to accomplish, they have communities or causes that they're trying to impact. And how do you know you're doing it? How do you
Right.
know you're actually making the difference that you say you're going to make, or that you feel you are making? And that is what program evaluation is about. And it's also about helping you understand if you're making great decisions, as you navigate, the twists and turns that your organization may be facing.
Mhm.
So program evaluation is taking data that tells a story about the mission and the impact that you are having and how effectively you're achieving that. So it involves a lot of data collection, data analysis, and data reporting, then being able to look at that and make decisions or conclusions or tell stories based on that data.
Okay. And further clarification, sometimes in these conversations, we hear people talk about outcomes and we hear people talk about outputs. What's the difference?
That's a really good question. Okay, so outcomes and outputs, you might hear that different definitions from different data nerds. I will give you the one that I like the most. Outputs are like widget counting. How many, how much, how many times? So how many referrals did we give out? How much money did we raise? These are things that you can count. And that's not to say it's not important. Outputs are a very, very important part of data that you collect, but it's not the whole story. Outcomes, on the other hand, are talking about the changes that you make
Mhm.
in the populations or communities or causes that you're trying to change. So that can be better defined by changes in attitudes or beliefs. So let's think about this from if you were going to do like a healthy eating program.
Mhm.
Uh, Low-hanging fruit, a short-term outcome might be getting the participants to say, hey, as a result of your program, I believe I can actually eat healthy because I have the
Mhm.
tools. Or I believe that eating this kind of food leads to health.
Got it.
Or now I have the knowledge, right? Changing my knowledge. Also, higher hanging fruit, as anyone who has ever tried to change their eating habits, is a change in behavior.
Yeah.
So that's more of a mid or long-term outcome. Really, now as a result of participating in your class, I can do things differently. I know how to cook at home and I actually do it. And then a long-term outcome also would be a change in circumstance. Maybe it's not about changing healthy habits. Maybe it's about getting more grocery stores in that community so that you can increase access to healthy food. Now my surrounding environment, my whole circumstance has changed because I can access healthy food, and before I couldn't. So that's
Okay.
a little
So
bit different.
so using that same analogy, then it would be the outcome would be the number of people who've gone through my healthy eating courses. No, the output would be the number of people who've gone through the healthy eating courses. And then the outcomes would range short term to long term from things like changing of what you think, changing of your behavior, or even changing of the environment to your point, like moving from, helping to advocate to move away from a food desert point of view where you've got a place for health. Okay.
Totally. You
Okay,
got
I'm with you. I'm on the same
it.
page.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, how should people start?
Okay. So there's kind of this. I know the point of this series is to talk about the things that you can do right now. So
Mhm.
I am going to go into that first, but I don't, if we have time, I would also like to give a little bit of a bigger picture, longer term,
Do it.
um, things that could set you up for success in
Okay.
program evaluation. So we'll start though with what could I do right now, tomorrow? So with most organizations, it's the case that you're already collecting data, even if you don't think about it that way. So something to try first is just understanding, what data do you already have? What data are you already collecting? And that might have to do with the programs that you're implementing. It might be on the finance or HR side of things, that you have data that you actually can use to tell a story about your mission in
Okay.
ways that you didn't think of before. So canvas your team. What data are we already collecting, and are there ways that we could be using it differently to tell a story about our mission? Um, I would love to give an example of that just to make it more concrete.
Please.
So
Yeah.
um, maybe you have a staff that clocks in and clocks out, and the time that they're clocked in, they're delivering services to people, and the time that they're clocked out, they're obviously not doing that. Not with you anyway. Maybe they have another nonprofit they work for at
Freelance
night.
nonprofit. Yeah, that happens.
So, even just looking at those HR hours, how many hours of service did we deliver? That's a great output that can tell a story about your mission, that you don't have to do anything else to collect. You're already collecting it through your HR systems. So maybe that's something you could start with if you haven't already used that data point to tell a story.
A great example, especially because it is something you're already recording. I think people might think that this work that if you're going to start evaluating, you need like a whole new system and a whole new. No, this is something that's right there already, and it does tell a story. That does the number of hours. That's a great example.
Yeah, and I think it is important to have a long-term vision and plan for how we're really going to do justice to the impact that we're making through data,
Mhm.
because not only because it's important to get your funders and your stakeholders and whomever is looking into your organization, holding you accountable to what you do. That's important. You gotta feed the beast, but also so that you can make good decisions, and you can use it to boost staff morale. Hey, this is what we're accomplishing, and the numbers are showing it. And maybe you are seeing this in the interactions you have every day, but look at this more globally. This is reflected by the data as well. And you can't celebrate achieving your goals if you don't have them. So you want to have goals that are measurable. People talk a lot about SMART goals, and that N, that measurable N, is a part of what data collection and program evaluation can do for you.
Interesting. And I want to touch on that point you made that there's I usually approach these problems from thinking about external audiences, like namely funders, especially in the grant space. Having a good evaluation logic and system is so important because that's what funders are going to want to know. A lot of funders, unfortunately, are really focused on outputs alone and they just want to know the numbers. And so you got to have that. But more and more funders are really interested in outcomes. So my my framework is usually like external audiences, but you brought up a great point from an internal audience perspective. Your staff, your volunteers, your internal team, this can really help you identify, when to celebrate, really help them see the impact that their work, because, to use that hour example, it's your hours. These staff members, your hours are contributing, and maybe you by yourself don't feel like you're moving the needle, but look at what you're doing collectively as a
Right.
whole. Like that could tell a really powerful story. I love that.
Yeah, and I want to underscore what you said. That's also important. And it drives investment in your organization. I mean, I
Right.
know I don't have to explain that. And I have heard you and other really savvy folks in the fundraising space talk about wanting to let your mission drive what funding you seek.
Yes.
And you talked about funders who want to see a lot of outputs. Can we imagine a world where you, as an organizational leader, you have your set of outputs and outcomes that your organization is able to produce and that speak most directly to your mission? And those are the ones that you report to your funder, and you're able to kind of have that conversation and negotiate with your funders about that. Hey, this doesn't map exactly on to what you're asking us to do, but could we substitute this instead? Because this is what we're really about, and this tells the story better.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the amount of change I'd like to see in the question of funders aspect, that's probably another conversation. But yeah, so jumping back to your first point, getting started, great first step to get started. Try this first. What do you already have? Like before you go to the grocery store, what have you already bought? What do you have in the cupboard? What do you have in the pantry? What's here? A lot of my analogies are food based.
I think I
But
started that.
no, believe me. So from if you're watching this video and you're thinking about getting more serious or more organized or more, more focused on this type of work, this discipline, start with what you already have. What are you already tracking? Let's start there. So what else? You mentioned, Mindy, that you wanted to look at some other issues that might affect your effectiveness as an organization in this, or make you ready for it. Help us understand some of those topics.
Yeah, so now that I'm off the hook, I got my thing that you can do
Yeah, you
tomorrow.
you have you have given me the output I requested, which was to answer that question. So
Excellent. Hopefully it
now we'll
leads
move on
to
to the
some
next thing.
changes in
Yes.
behavior, which outcome. Okay, so I want to talk about organizational readiness
Yeah.
because one of the things that we in particular focus on at Fireside whenever we engage with a client on program evaluation is, what do you have as an organization? Where are you at in your program evaluation journey? And what can you sustain? Because the last thing we want is to come in as data people and design a really complex, awesome data collection scheme, and then we dip out and you can't sustain it because we're not
Mhm.
there. So organizational readiness is really, really important. We want to be realistic. We want to design something that can be implemented and sustained long term. So what kinds of questions ideally that leaders could be asking themselves and their teams before embarking on a program evaluation journey? Besides, what data do we already have? Uh, how well does that tell the story? How much data do we really need? Do we have too much data? Are we trying to hone it in? Do we have the wrong data where we find ourselves unable to tell a great story with this data, even though we know we have one? So understanding the quality, the reach, the scope of your data is super important, because any consultant that comes in to help with that is going to rely on you to know some of that. You're going to be the expert, right, on your own
Yeah.
accomplishments and your own data. Um, I think a recent example I could give you, we worked with an organization that we really enjoyed working with, and their issue was they were collecting hundreds of data points for every client that went through their program. And we were able to help them narrow it down to about 20% of the data points that they were actually collecting. And it still told the story just as well. And it actually gave better data points to their funders than they had been collecting before. And it eased the burden on their staff
Right. Yeah.
in terms of collecting that data. So that or that they were sort of in the organizational readiness spectrum in a place where they were ready to kind of contract their program evaluation schemes. So that's an example of
No,
organizational
that's
readiness.
really interesting yeah, it never occurred to me that it's not just about collecting data, it's about collecting the right data. And not every piece of data is, necessarily meaningful. Like if for some reason you're collecting the shoe size of everybody you're serving, at some point you have to ask, like, well, what are we doing with this? Is this helping us? Like
Yeah.
that doesn't. So it also occurs to me, Mindy, and correct and jump in on this one, but it feels like your data collection strategy really has to follow your clear like organizational vision and goals. Like you've got to lay out this map of where, because so the data doesn't tell you where you're going, it tells you where you've been, right? Or it tells you maybe your pathway to get there. But your vision and goals have to lay out that this is where the organization is going to head to.
Yes. So to get really wonky, there's
Do it. That's why you're here. So yes.
there's data that tells you where you are, and there's data that's more predictive, right? That's tell you where you might be going. How much can we
Oh,
expand in the next 5 years? How many residents, clients, community members, I'm saying residents because of my day job, supporting residents and communities with another nonprofit, but that's the term we use all day long.
yeah.
How many clients can we afford to expand to? How will that affect our finances? How will that affect our staff? How will that affect our ability to scale our services? So that's predictive data, right? But then you have data that tells you where you're at. How well are we implementing our services? Is it high quality? Are we achieving the impacts we hope to achieve right now? And all of that stems from having a really good compass. I would say it starts with your programmatic vision, your vision of your mission and
Mhm.
the services that you are going to provide to achieve that mission. That's got to be crystal clear so that you can then say, as a result of this, we are going to achieve these outcomes and it's measurable in this specific way. And we can help with the measurable part, but the program design part, the part where you figure out, hey, this is the service that we really think is going to affect this problem or move the needle on this issue. That's the kind of thing that we want to be really solid on before we start measuring it from a program evaluation standpoint. There are other types of evaluation that we can help with that talk, exploratory evaluation, research. If you're not sure how to solve the problem, that's someplace that we could meet you. But I'm assuming if you've already got a nonprofit and people providing services that, you know,
Yeah.
maybe past that point. The other piece I want to mention is data literacy.
Okay, what's
I
that?
I think, well, this is the idea that your leaders or you yourself can look at data and draw conclusions from it and make decisions based on it, and that you understand when you're looking at data, questions to ask about it to help you understand, what it's telling you. This is really taken for granted in a world where data-driven decision making is such a buzzword. And I just want to offer comfort and validation to the many leaders out there who probably don't have great data literacy. That is totally okay. I don't know where we got this idea that everybody was just born with this ability. It's not something you learn everywhere. If you look at the research on this, if you're in a room with 10 business leaders from all over the world, different industries, you can probably rely on that 3 of them would tell you that I can actually take action. I know how to take action based on the data that I'm given, or, this data actually gives me value.
Yeah.
So you're not alone if you're not one of those 3. And don't be afraid as a leader to seek that out for yourself and seek that out for your staff, because it's a really important part of making sense of the data that you collect and knowing how to leverage it.
I like that point too, because I have from a fundraising perspective, oftentimes we're asked to interpret data. Here's a list of donor activities or donor behavior. What can you tell us about that? And that's something I struggled with too, because I can tell you that, donor X looks like they like to give in November, so I want to talk to them in September and have that conversation about their giving. That's pretty much I think a lot of people are data literate when it comes to like your gas gauge. Like, oh, I know this means I need to get gas soon, or this means I need to get gas right now. But
Yeah.
beyond that, there's so many variables. So how does one, if someone is starting this process, and where does data literacy come from? Or how do you, where can you go to start working this muscle out?
That's such a great question. And Rebecca, my business partner at Fireside, and I are currently putting together a list of resources that hopefully will be ready in time for when this episode gets published. And you can come to our website and pick it up there.
Great.
And we'll provide a link to it. But we want to have an answer to that question, because I can't tell you off the top of my head. I'm not sure that I know from experience, a really great, like, hey, here's a great boot camp for leaders on data literacy.
Mhm.
But I'm sure they're out there. So I want to tackle that. The one that I do know of and that I will plug because it is so good, it's called We All Count. And it's an organization that focuses on using data equitably. So, and they have resources for program evaluators and data strategists like me, as well as nonprofit leaders, government leaders, basically anyone in any kind of organization that is trying to help people can go there and get really awesome resources on how to use data in ways that make sure you're administering your programs equitably across different demographics.
Okay, we all count.
Yeah.
We will put the link to that in the notes to this episode so people can go and check them out. And this is we're coming to the part of the conversation that I have been calling the self-serving part of the conversation. And it's the time when a consultant talks about how important it is for nonprofits to hire consultants. But I will say that clearly there's things that you can do like right now. There's data you have, and there's probably some analysis you can do with the data you have, and some stories you can start telling with the data you have. But I think what I'm hearing from you, Mindy, when you talk about the different types of data and using data to talk about our progress and our this is how far we've gone, this is how far we could go. Clearly, there's a need for expertise at some level here. So why should someone, or when should someone think about bringing in a consultant to help them, with these issues?
If you are the kind of leader who's watching this, you're probably interested in how data can help you. And I would say that is enough. You're ready. Call, give us a call.
Asking the
Because,
question is enough, right? Like the fact that you're thinking
yeah,
about it is a good sign.
because it's not a given, I think that the kinds of leaders who are prioritizing data as an important piece of what they do, how they run their companies, how they run their services, how they support their staff. Those are the kinds of folks we like to work with.
Yeah.
And we can meet you where you're at. So, yeah, I think if you're watching this, you probably have enough of an interest. If you got past the outputs versus outcomes conversation,
If you're still with us.
you're probably one of our people. So, yeah.
And another thing I want to draw attention to is we're kind of in the closing stages of the episode, but there's a couple through lines that I've seen in all of these episodes, and one of them is that none of these aspects of nonprofit management or nonprofit leadership, none of these aspects can stand alone. And when I was talking with Sarah Neely from Orange Door Consulting, we talked about the grant program. To be really successful, the grant program has to kind of live within this nexus of the fundraising team, the program team, and the grant writer. That's really this sweet spot that when I was talking with Mary Davidson about special events, like an event just can't be a thing that happens and then when you're done, you walk away from it. It has to be part of your fundraising narrative, your fundraising story. And similarly, I see that with what you've been talking about today, Mindy, that program evaluation, actually having the conversations, are our programs working? Do our programs do what we say they're going to do? Can we prove it? That has a fundraising implication. That has a marketing and communications implication. That has a programs implication. That has a board governance implication. Like it's real. This is real fundamental stuff here. But it can't just be, you can't just like have one day where you look at your data and then be like, well, we looked at it, we're done. It's got to be part of like the lifeblood of your organization. Is that, I assume that's kind of what you've seen in your work too,
Yeah, you said
ideally.
that so well. It's all interconnected. There's just this unifying theory of nonprofit governance, management, performance that involves all of those pieces. And you know, we're talking specifically about program evaluation, but evaluation is so much broader even than
Hmm.
just programs, you know. And so, you know, there's a slice of that that can help your fundraising team. There's a slice of it that can help your board, can help HR. Um, all of these things that you do internally and externally can be measured and can give you insights on, as you put it, where you are and where you might be going.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And there's probably a whole nother, like we could probably do a whole nother episode just talking about once you've gotten the data and once you've created conclusions from the data, how do you present that to a broader audience? There's thought that has to be put in there. And the only example I have, and it's a very small example, but when I started working at Habitat for Humanity of Orange County, when I was working with the fundraising committee of the board, the only fundraising data they had was the accounting like statement from the prior month. So they could sit down as a committee and see what we raised in each category 30 days ago.
Okay.
And it was really hard for them to use that data in any meaningful way because all they could tell me is like, well, why was this low? And I could say like, first off, how can you answer a question? Why did somebody not give? I don't know. They didn't give. Like, no one was happy. Everyone was like, I don't know. And so I worked with the committee chair. We built a new dashboard and it focused on things like the number of meetings the fundraising staff was going to, and our funding rate for grants, and our appeal open rate for our mail appeal. So all of a sudden, they had a much better sense of where we were right now.
Mhm.
You know, we even used like a red, yellow, green, designation. Red was like we're in trouble. Yellow was like it's on the way. And so they could see like, oh, where do I need to put my attention as a board member? And I
Yeah.
could help them make weigh in on things and make ultimately better decisions. And I think that's an example maybe of taking that data and packaging it. Again, not enough time to dig into it, but are there elements of data communication or packaging that you can touch on real quick here?
Yeah, identifying an audience is the most important part of presenting data. Who is consuming this data and
Yeah.
for what purpose? And it all starts from there. So you gave an example, board, to me, high level, what you just explained, very appropriate. They may spend a few minutes looking at it and they need to get what they need to get out of it very quickly. Versus you may have more nuanced, more detailed tables, less pretty, but more functional because you can filter them. And that might be more for your internal staff who are responsible for supervising implementation of various projects, services, etc. And so setting that up correctly for them so they can quickly access what they need to and see if things are on track. So those are just two examples, but a lot of organizations produce annual reports.
Hmm.
And so thinking about the broader public and
Yeah.
how they consume your data. There's many examples of different audiences and purposes for data, and it can all be the same data, but it's all going to look very different.
Love that. I love that. Okay, so where to start? You start with the data you've got. You start with what you have. You have to have a clear vision, and this again has to be tied to and supporting of your organizational goals and vision. You need to have your leadership team. If you are the leadership team, you need to be ready for this. Like, let's make this part of what we do. And to Mindy's point earlier as well, it's okay if you're not super data literate. Like it's okay if you can't like look at a spreadsheet and be like, oh, I've got that locked in. But if you're not there, let's work on getting you there. Like figure out how to build that skill because it is a skill. It's not
Yes.
something that you inherit with the title of your job that you just wake up in the morning like, Neo in the Matrix, like, oh, I know how to do a pivot table in Excel now. No, you don't. You got to learn it. I still don't know what that is. So all these things come into play, learning the stuff, and then when you reach the point, knowing when to bring in the experts. So on that front, Mindy, tell us a little bit about Fireside Consulting and what you guys do and where people can find you.
So Fireside Consulting grew out of my business partner, Rebecca Heilman, and my vision to have a place where mission-driven organizations could come to get help with program evaluation, data strategy, and related things. So you can find us at the website, LinkedIn, and contact info that
Usual
Chris is going to
places.
share with this. And yeah, we do a range of different services. We've worked with great organizations who have really specific data needs, and great organizations that have really broad data needs or need help defining their data needs. So we're dedicated to meeting you where you're at, making this a little less scary than it might seem, and giving you some expertise that you can really rely on and carry forward.
Love it. Love it. And we should also say Rebecca was going to join us, couldn't join us. So if you have really, really difficult questions, Rebecca, you can talk to Rebecca. The easy questions,
She is
um,
currently making progress towards her doctorate in evaluation, which is why she's not here. So
that's yeah.
we are obviously really, really enthusiastic and passionate about
I
data.
love that. I love it. Well, Mindy, thank you for joining me and agreeing to be a part of this experiment. I've always enjoyed your perspective on things and talking to you. It's always a treat. For those of you watching this, thanks for being a part of this too. We got some more episodes of Try This First coming your way soon. But if you have questions about data and evaluation, Mindy's here. And if you have questions about your team and your leadership and your strategic approach to data, I'd be happy to help with that too. So thanks for all that, and we will talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.